is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York. It is Friday night in the quarantine zone. Hope you all are doing okay. And this time we got Jason of Dry Kill Logic. Thank you for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
Right on, man. Thanks for having me.
Yep, it's awesome to have you here. So, you have these two new singles out, which is Vices and Don't See Ghosts. So, this is the first new material we're getting from you guys in a while. So, could this maybe serve as a clear representation of what maybe the next full-length Dry Kill Logic album could sound like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to put it out there that we're doing a full length. That hasn't really been what we talked about or the plan moving forward. But that being said, it definitely is the sound, the direction. If it feels like a departure or a continuation of something, I mean, it's just definitely where we're at right now, writing wise. What represents what we're listening to, what's happening when we get together with each other, and what we want to hear when we put stuff out there moving forward. Mm-hmm. Working with someone new, mixing, hopefully coming on a little more hands-on in the production role, possibly. I've been producing thus far, but working with Greg Thomas from End, he used to be in Shai Harud, played with a lot of bands, mixed with a lot of great bands, so we're really happy with what we've been doing with him.
Yeah, and these new singles are absolutely awesome. Does it feel like almost you're kind of just making a continuation of from a Vengeance and Violence, or do you almost feel like, since it's been such a long time, that it's almost kind of like a fresh start for Dry Kill Logic?
I'd have to say it's a little bit of both. Let's see, like in the case of Don't See Ghost, the riff in the verse actually kind of started way back when. I wouldn't say right after Vengeance, but probably 2 or 3 years after that. That's a riff that was just kicking around for a while that I never really knew what to do with. And then about 2 years ago, getting together with Brendan on bass one day, and at the time still with Phil, I was like, hey, remember this riff we had? And Brendan's like, oh, I got this other thing I think might work with it afterwards, finally. So there's a little bit of every now and then, like a riff that's been hanging around that was just cataloged. Right, I keep hundreds. Everything I come up with, I always record it, document it, keep it stored away on a hard drive somewhere. And every now and then, I go back to it and say, hey, is there anything that inspires me, makes me think something new, or is there something I just want to straight out grab, even if it's 10, 15 years old, or something that didn't make an old album? If it works, it works. So in that sense, it's a continuation because we've never stopped writing. I've never stopped writing. Some of the stuff, popped up after years being dormant, and other stuff, most devices for the most part, was brand new, written in the moment, but you never know where it's going to come from.
I've noticed that there is kind of when I was listening to Ghosts, it almost kind of had a throwback element, a Vengeance and Violence. I remember listening to the riffage in that, and it kind of had a throwback, when when I was in middle school listening to the Vengeance album. So it's really cool on how Vices and Don't See Ghosts really do kind of represent a time, kind of a new era, as well as bringing in some of the older elements of Dry Kill.
Right on, thanks. Yeah, I mean, look, truth of the matter is, I'm an old man at this point, and I think at a certain time, even if you continue to grow as a musician, you kind of are who you are at that point. You have, in my case, somewhat of a voice. Other guys are much more defined. I don't know if I've ever had that heavy of a definition in the way I play. It's hard for me to know that from the inside looking out. But that being said, there's my influences, although there might be new things that I bring to the table, new bands that I hear, new songs I hear that inspire me one way or another, the stuff that I grew up with is still in there, and I'm still kind of coming from the same place that I always was. So it's not like I'm going to come out and all of a sudden I'm going to, as much as I love a band like Polyphia or Periphery or something like that, the more technical bands, not like all of a sudden I'm going to come out and start sounding like Tim Henson. It's just not how I grew up. It's not how I approached being a guitar player for 20 years before this, so it's not going to be how I sound moving forward either. There's still going to be an element of how I always sounded in everything I wrote, just hopefully with something, like you said, something a little extra on top of it, a little more modern, just a little more updated, or just new things that I've taken along the way that I've added to what's already been there.
Well, I've always thought that Dry Kill's Logic was on the fairly experimental side. I know that some artists are kind of iffy on that term, but with the last album, going from My Dying Heart to Caught in the Storm to From Victim to Killer to Dead Man's Eyes, I feel like your songs have many different vibes, and I felt incorporate a lot of different inspirations at the same time. So I think it's fair to say that maybe like experimentation is almost kind of like essential for the Dry Kill Logic writing process, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say you're wrong there. I don't know if it's necessarily been to our benefit over the years, because it's kind of hard in a lot of ways to peg us down and say, oh yeah, this is a band that sounds exactly like this song. No matter what they do, it's always kind of in this vein. And there's nothing wrong with, I mean, some of my favorite bands are those bands that have that. But yeah, we've always been guys, everybody in the band, regardless of what time or lineup it was in the band, everybody always brought stuff to the table. Everybody always influenced each other. And we all come from, even though we have a lot of shared bands and influences in common, we come from a lot of different places, a lot of different backgrounds. So yeah, you take a song like going back to The Dead and Dreaming, something like One-Handed Knife Fight, or some of the other ones on there, there's, you're going to hear a lot more of the post-core and hardcore influences that I had at the time. Guitar players like Chris Traynor or, Tom Capone. You're going to hear a lot of influence in some of the riffs I was doing there. Other times you hear, a song like Buckles, Phil was really into Slayer. That, I think, informed a lot of his drums at the time on that song. I was really listening a lot to like early Converge, bands like Botch. Me and Brendan, who eventually became our bass player but wasn't in the band at the time, he was really into that, getting that kind of stuff, turning me onto that stuff, like early Cave-In and everything. So I was trying to come up with riffs that were kind of in that vein. And, that's just where we were coming from. It didn't really matter if it fit a particular mold or not. If it sounded good to us and we enjoyed playing it, we did it. We put it out. We didn't really care, if it fit with this preconceived notion of what we were supposed to sound like.
Well, I think that's very representative, like in your fan base too. Like I saw people who listen to like bands like Glassjaw or Converge or Poison the Well appreciate you guys. I saw people who listen to like bands like Stained or Korn appreciate you guys, and I know people who listen to Cattle Decapitation who could appreciate you guys. I feel like Dry Kill Logic was almost kind of like a gateway to getting people into both heavier stuff, but also getting people into more, for lack of better words, like mainstream stuff as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's kind of funny though. At the time when these albums were coming out, the first album, although I wasn't in the band at the time, I want to say it was 2001 when Darker Side came out. But even with me, 2004, 2006, it didn't really feel that way. We kind of always felt like we were a little behind the curve of what was going on. Like, we definitely were getting lumped in with the new metal thing, and I get it. The first album had a lot of elements of that. But that being said, we were always doing whatever we wanted to do and not really worry about the labels, but we were getting forced into these subcategories, and people were just kind of, and again, this is just my perspective from it, but people were in a lot of ways just, a lot of people writing us off, being like, oh, that's that new metal band, or that, I think they sound like this, and I'm not really going to pay attention to it. Now, fast forward, 13 years later, and yeah, I start hearing what you just said a lot coming at me, like, oh, this was the band, actually I like them, and they got me into all these other bands, or even more to that point, I'm hearing people go, I never really listened to those other albums you guys put out. I didn't realize that you were also, like you guys also sounded like this, and you wrote songs and had riffs like this. It's like, yeah, kind of always did, but you just assumed, you assumed what we sounded like and never really gave it a chance. So it's nice that, history has kind of revised our role in the scene a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the periodic table of heavy metal subgenres has more than the periodic table of elements now in science. So, like,
you're not wrong.
And I was having a discussion with a lot of artists about this, that, like, the future almost just seems genreless at this point. Like, I see so many, like, really heavy bands incorporating some poppier material. I see a lot of pop bands incorporating a lot of metal influences. It almost seems like that genres are kind of, in a way, like, fading away, and that everybody is just appreciating music in itself.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, in some ways, I think they're getting splintered even more, but yeah, I think the fan bases are crossing over. Like, I brought up the band Polyphia before. I mean, there's nothing metal, really, about that band. There's hip-hop influences, there's pop influences. It's just, for the most part, it's instrumental music, but they get love from the metal community, and they're featured on the heavy metal websites. I mean, yeah, granted, they're shredders, and it kind of goes hand in hand, a little bit with the musicianship, but for the most part, a Rihanna fan can appreciate them, I think, just as much as, as anybody who's into Gen or anything, like that in the heavier realm. So, yeah, I think you're right that it is becoming a lot more fluid, and people aren't so concerned with just being locked into one genre. When I was growing up, it was kind of it was like if you were into thrash metal, like you caught shit from your friends if you were also into Hairspray or anything like that. And it's like, I love progressive metal. Like I worship bands like Sanctuary and Fates Warning and stuff like that as much as I worship bands like Testament and Death Angel. And I always loved Motley Crue and Dokken and bands like that, especially when I got into playing guitar at like 13, 14 years old. Like it just, if the musicianship was there, if the songs were there, I liked it. But yeah, it used to be really difficult to kind of cross those genres. I mean, I guess the most evident would have been like the hardcore and the punk guys or the hardcore and the metal guys. There was no love lost between those genres. And it's very different now, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah, and I never understood, too, because I always thought that Slayer and Agnostic Front were both very raw, very brutally honest, dark, in-your-face forms of music. I never understood how one couldn't appreciate the other. But, I've been lectured on it a good amount of times that, like, hardcore, I guess, is more about passion and metal is more about technical excellence. But I see both sides of that in there, too. So that's, like, one of those things that I think are better left in mystery.
Yeah. I mean, and, geez, look at Slayer. I mean, Hanneman loved hardcore and punk rock. Like, he was so influenced by punk and speed and stuff like that had nothing to do with metal. I mean, I don't know. I think for the most part, it's more something that the fans like to argue over, not so much the musicians.
Yeah, it's our tribal instincts.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yep. When it came to like writing this newer material and stuff like that with these two new singles and maybe pushing forward with some more new stuff, like was there kind of like a pinnacle moment to just continue making music after A Vengeance and Violence, or was that like have you guys always wanted to do it? Maybe did you take a break? Like what kind of ultimately led you guys to finally blessing us with some newer music?
One, thank you for saying that. When we ended the touring cycle for Vengeance and Violence, it was definitely a rough time for us as a band. The label had folded. We kind of got screwed out of a bunch of money that we were supposed to have that was still owed to us. And honestly, we were just very burned out. We had some great tours, but they were hard. They were a lot of work. And I don't mean like in this, like touring is hard and I'm not crying about it, but it's also a ton of fun. But horrible routing and bad promotion. Like basically a few people involved dropped the ball for that last year we were working. Other people picked it up as best they can and busted their asses for us, but it was very strenuous on us mentally and physically that last run, that last year. And we all kind of needed a break and we needed to clear our heads and get on to other stuff for a while. Plus we were getting older, families were starting, just, all the stuff that comes with it. And when you're not able to fully support yourself on what you're doing, you got to start looking elsewhere to make that happen. So that being said, after literally the end of 2006, December, when we got back from our last European tour on Vengeance and Violence, the label folded. The guy disappeared for a while, and we kind of went our separate ways. Brendan went on to front a band called Pristina, more like in the sludge grindcore vein.
Were they out of Connecticut?
Yeah, exactly. That's where Brendan's from. That's where I'm originally a New Haven guy. I've been in New York about 20 years, but I'm originally from New Haven.
Okay.
And me and him have been playing in bands together since '99.
Yeah, because I remember listening. I remember listening to a song by Pristina. I don't know if I'm thinking of the same one, but like it was like sludgy, but also like a lot of death metal rawness into it as well.
That's that. Yeah, Brendan played bass and he was the singer. I mean, it was his band. He wrote a ton of the stuff, and that was always very much. I mean, like not that you really hear it necessarily, but if like you listen to the verse and Vice It, I wrote that very much with Brendan in mind, who. For him, his influences were like "Today Is the Day" and bands like that. So I was like, I want to do something that Brendan's going to get excited about. Like that. That was my mindset when I was writing the first riff from Vices. Like this is something with some dissonance and a little sludge to it. Not saying it's a sludge riff or anything. But it was definitely like, what can I do that Brendan would be excited about? That was the emphasis to that. But going back to the original question you asked, we all kind of went on to other things. I ended up stepping into Broadway for about a decade, doing like Broadway musicals, tours, and off and on Broadway, stuff like that. Everybody just, went on with life, but we always remained really, really close friends, and we always got together and jammed, whether it was one-on-one or just a great excuse for the four of us to get together again. Played through some of the old stuff, talked about what we were doing. We never stopped being friends. And over the years, I mean, it's been quite a few now, but after a couple of years of that, it was like, hey, let's put together a song or two. But it was always more, it was just for us. Like I said, it was just an excuse to get together, hang out, bullshit, reminisce, just, a good excuse for us to get together for a night or a weekend or whatever. Over time, we started saying, you know what, we got a bunch of stuff here, and some of it sounds pretty good. Why don't we do a little more with it? That's how the talk started a couple of years ago. It was still very, very kind of low-level organic talks, like, hey, what do you want to do? And then one by one, the pieces started to fall into place. Brendan's like, hey, I know this guy who has a studio, this guy Greg Thomas, maybe we can do it ourselves a little bit and send it to him, and he can mix it and punch it up and make it sound good. Well, what's he do? It's like, I think I know that guy. We look at his, at his resume and his studio, and like his resume is in the other bands he's produced and the stuff in the bands that he used to be in. We're like, yeah, that guy's awesome. Let's see if he's interested. And again, it was one of those things. He was like, oh yeah, he was one of those guys who was like, oh yeah, I went back and listened to your stuff. You guys have some good stuff in there. Like, oh, thanks. He's like, yeah, let's work together. And little things like that started falling into place. Somebody knew somebody at E1, and we're like, hey, if we do this, would you guys have any interest in putting it out? And they were like, yeah, sure. Actually, like, we remember you guys. You were around doing your thing. Like, yeah, sure, we'll distribute for you guys if you want to. So all these little things started falling into place, and then it was like, all right, well, let's put our money where our mouths are now, and do a song or two. And that's just kind of how it started about a year and a half, 2 years ago.
That's awesome. And E1 are great people too. So like, you have like a great team behind you guys as well.
Yeah. I mean, we're not on E1 proper. They're just doing distribution, but they've, I mean, actually, even more to your point, they're just doing distribution, but they have been, anytime we call or send them an email, they've just been amazing. Like, they treat us better than we were ever treated on labels that we were actually signed to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've been outstanding. Everyone, and I'm just going to jump ahead for a second. We're only doing this because we enjoy doing it. We enjoy hanging out with each other. If this wasn't fun and we didn't love it, we wouldn't do it because we have other things going on. We do this for ourselves. We're grateful that people dig it and people want to hear it and they're liking it, but we do this because we like writing with each other and we enjoy the time together, and it's fun doing it at this level now. So if there was somebody who was working with us that was kind of grinding against that, we just wouldn't work with them. But we've been really, really lucky thus far that everyone we work with has been really awesome about everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing to be in a band with a great group of people, but to have a great team as well behind you, supporting you, always just makes it 10 times better.
Yeah. Every step of the way, it's everybody we've dealt with, whether it was publicists or the people at the label, or just at this point trying to call and getting somebody on the phone at Spotify or something like. Just everyone's been really, really great this time. So it's been a really great experience.
That's awesome. You guys, I know that you guys. I actually wanted to ask you about this because you just brought this up. But working on Broadway for a while, that's actually really, really cool. And like, has being a performer in rock or metal have maybe influenced how you work on Broadway as well, and vice versa as well?
Yeah. Well, as far as vice versa goes, it's made me a much more well-rounded player. It's introduced me to concepts. I mean, I've never been an incredibly technical player. I don't come from like musical theory backgrounds or anything like that. I was always kind of like, hey, I learned 3 chords. I could start writing songs and grab 2 friends and go play shows now. I was always very kind of just running gun and really didn't put the hours in to do the right thing in the beginning. I was too busy being a kid and just running around being an idiot. So getting involved in Broadway really taught me about, I mean, I always thought I had the work ethic to do it, but it taught me how to really focus on what's important in a pit, working as part of sometimes a huge orchestra. Also, I got horn players and string players coming at me, stuff I've never dealt with. I also have to learn how to read music to a degree, but for the most part, I ended up just learning everything. Every show I was in, I usually just learn it by ear and memorize it and kind of fake my way through the book. But truth be told, most music directors at a certain point realized what I was doing, and they didn't really care as long as, I'm doing what they need at the end of the day. They don't care how you get there. And I realized a lot of guys in Broadway, I mean, most guys are schooled and stuff in Broadway, but at the end of the day, nobody cares. If you're doing the job, that's all that's important. So it definitely tightened up my work ethic, and it brought other elements to my playing that I didn't really think I would have in my playing. Just different chord voicings and just ways of orchestrating and arranging. It expanded my knowledge of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean...
As far as... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying that, like, I've witnessed those Broadway shows before. I mean, the technical excellence and the production aspect behind it. I mean, I wouldn't want to be the guy in charge of the production team on Broadway, because all it takes is just one cable for that whole thing to be ruined.
Yeah. Not even one cable. I mean, you're dealing with hundreds of moving parts, hundreds of people, whether it's like a costume designer or a lighting rig guy. The band and the actors aside, there's so many people behind the scenes, the assorted stage manager. I mean, it's fucking bananas. But you know, one of the other things you asked though is coming from the metal background, going into it. It's funny, but most cats in the Broadway scene really quickly kind of realized where my strong suit was as far as being a player goes. None of them knew me from Dry Kill or other bands I was in, you know, because these are all guys who were meeting me for the first time, but really quickly they're like, oh, you know, you got this kind of strong right hand, this good picking thing, you got a deep pocket, and I just started finding myself in all these shows that made sense for me as a player. Like my first gig was with the musical Rent. I went out on the tour with that. You know, fast forward a bunch of off-Broadway shows and stuff like that, and some pop-oriented. Like I always ended up though with the more modern, not like your kind of like your traditional Sondheim and stuff like that musicals. I found myself more like in the rock and pop musicals. But after Rent, I ended up being involved with American Idiot, the Green Day musical.
Oh, awesome!
Where that picking hand really came in handy. You know, like there's some decent playing in that stuff. And a guy that I knew was the lead guitar player on that show on Broadway, but he was involved with a lot of stuff and needed to take a lot of time off, and he made me his go-to fill-in guy, what's called a sub on Broadway, a substitute player. And I was in there constant. I was in there, you know, a good 8 to 10 shows a month every month, which was great. I even got to play like when Billy Joe from Green Day came in and took over one of the roles as an actor. You know, I played his Broadway debut, which was great. Like all of a sudden, you know, love or hate Green Day, I mean, you can't deny that they're a big influential band who's done a lot in the industry.
They're
and
phenomenal.
Here I am playing acoustic guitar, just me and Billy singing alone, and no one else is playing. And I'm standing on stage in front of like, you know, whatever, you know, 1,000 people in this house, and I'm like playing guitar for Billy Joe from Green Day. Like, in what world does this happen for a guy who's in some metal band?
Yeah, you'd be amazed. You'd be amazed. I mean, think about it. Like Monty Pittman who played guitar in Prong and does his own solo metal stuff, signed to Metal Blade Records, and then he's also Madonna's guitar player. So
exactly. I think Rob Caggiano from Anthrax will Volbeat now, but like, you know, I think he did some gigs with like Sean Combs back in the day. Well, not for nothing, you know, the drummer, you know, the musical Wicked.
Yeah.
The drummer is Matt Vanderend, who was the drummer for Defiance, who was like a Bay Area thrash band in the '80s.
So
I mean, there's a few guys who have you know, a couple of guys who come from metal backgrounds, legit, or even just as fans. So that was nice to find a little like, you know, sub clique within the scene.
Yeah, Broadway is more metal than what people think. I went to performing arts camp, and let me tell you that rehearsing for plays at times, it makes the drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket look like Mother Teresa. Like,
oh yeah, and 8 shows a week. Like, no band's doing 8 shows a week on the road. I mean, even a band like Hatebreed is doing 6. You know, maybe 7 days or 10 days in a row, and then a day off. But 8 shows a week every week, and when you're doing the tour, there's no time off. So you'll do 6 months, 8 shows a week without a break sometimes. It's rough.
It's rough, but again, like, I'm just so impressed. I've always said that they need to go make a heavy metal Broadway musical, like, one day.
I would love that. I would love that.
Like, if you take like some of those,
but it always gets neutered in the end.
No, because I can honestly see like a lot of these. Imagine like those symphonic metal bands, like Epica or Within Temptation or Lacuna Coil or Moonspell.
Well, look at the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Look at the Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Yeah, I mean, they could do it.
Practically already what you're saying, you know.
Yeah, just like you have all the people speaking the old English like they did, like, you know, in Romeo and Juliet, but but they play Dark Tranquility for the music.
Well, get on it, man.
I'm gonna save your number. We're gonna maybe pitch something.
Right on.
And the final question I wanted to ask you is: you guys originated in Westchester County, right?
Yeah. Not me. Like I said, I'm originally from New Haven, but yeah, the band itself, the original four guys are from Westchester.
Okay.
Like New Rochelle, Port Chester, that area.
Okay, well, neighboring areas, because I've always heard, like I interviewed Hatebreed last year, and I was told that like both Westchester and Connecticut, because they're fairly close to each other, there was like a happening scene there. Was like, I know you weren't in the band, like I know you didn't really, you didn't come into Dry Kill Logic until The Dead and Dreaming, right? You weren't on the Darker Side of Monster.
I joined at the tail end of the touring site, kind of like I did a bunch of shows, still with the on the Darker Side of Nonsense. It was still Dave Kowach on bass. I had just replaced Scott. When Roadrunner said, we're parting ways with the band, the guitar player said, I'm moving on to another thing. And that's when I had just left the band out of New Haven that I was with for a few years, and I had joined, and we still did a handful of shows that was supporting the Darker Side when we started, and then we started writing The Dead and Dreaming.
Okay, so were you kind of like, was Dry Kill Logic like associated with kind of like the hardcore scene or like the East Coast hardcore scene in general?
Not really definitely not with the New Haven hardcore scene. The hardcore scene was very much traditional, old school hardcore for the most part. Dry Kill, I remember hearing about Dry Kill Logic even back when they were called Hinge, because, they were a hard-working band. And, we would come, I was in another band at the time that would come through New York and, meet guys at shows or mutual friends and stuff like that. There was very much like a Westchester scene that was happening at the time that they were a part of, like places like Marty's and stuff like that. And they, from what I remember, what I remember seeing, and even just being in the band and talking to the guys over the years, they were like, for Westchester, there was a couple of venues where national acts would come through, and Dry Kill, or back when they were called Hinge, they were the go-to opening act for those bands. New Haven, much like Boston, was very inclusive. Everybody came through, but the New Haven scene was the New Haven scene. The Boston scene was the Boston scene. So it was pretty segregated that way. Although the bands traded off with each other, everyone knew where everybody was from in the Northeast.
Okay, because I feel like the Northeast scene, whether it's New York or Connecticut or New Jersey, I feel like is like so like incestuous in a way. Like everybody knows each other. I feel like East Coast metalheads and senior citizens. Those are the two types of people where everybody knows each other.
Right on. Yeah, well, definitely in the tri-state. Like being a kid from New Haven, we would come down to New York, CB's for a matinee or something like that, or Webster for shows and whatnot. People from New York would come up to like the Anthrax in Norwalk to see hardcore and punk shows, or the Tune in New Haven. So there definitely was traveling back and forth, and people knew each other. Half of the New York hardcore scene were suburban kids from Connecticut. A lot of those guys in like the old school New York hardcore scene. A lot of them were New York guys, obviously too, but a lot of those guys came in from the suburbs of Connecticut to join bands.
Wow, it's incredible, like on just where everybody comes from, because it seems like everybody has like a similar goal within the scene, but they all come from different backgrounds. I feel like the music is really what united people together.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. I love the music.
Yeah, definitely. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this discussion. Just obviously, thanks to a certain virus that I'm not naming on this outlet, obviously shows aren't happening at the moment. But, with hearing some new Dry Kill Logic music, is there a chance maybe we could, get some shows happening in the near future or something like that when concerts are a thing again?
When concerts are a thing again, it's definitely something we talked about. What it's going to look like, who knows? 6 months, a year from now. But before the the apocalypse started, we talked about maybe going to Europe, doing the festival runs if they'd have us, or doing just doing like a couple of like select big shows here in the States. Something hometown, maybe something in Flint where we always had a good time. We consider the guys up there family. A lot of people. we definitely talked about it, and that hasn't come off the table by any stretch. It just seems like it's been, we had to kick that can down the road a little bit just because of what's going on in the world. But it definitely was always something that we intended to do, moving forward. We definitely felt like we wanted to get out there and just play live a little more.
Listen, we have the Rage Against the Machine reunion scheduled to happen when this shit's over. We have the My Chemical Romance reunion scheduled to happen. We need the Dry Kill Logic reunion tour scheduled to happen.
Right on. We will get there. We will get there, and I will call you.
Awesome. Thank you. But thank you so much, Jason. Everybody, Dry Kill Logic. Be sure to check out the 2 new singles, Vices and Don't See Ghosts. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.